Welcome to part 2 of this week's podcast.
So how do I know if this is effective with my member? And also I have people so a question I get a lot is, we just had a member go through a membership council because of sexual sin. Clinically, I would say they're struggling with a sexual addiction or sexually compulsive behavior, whatever it is. How do I meet with this person every week or every two? What do I say? Jesus loves you. Jesus loves you. Jesus still loves you. Sorry, It was a hard week, right? I feel awkward. And also, I'm paying for this therapy, or I know they're going to therapy. How do I know it's effective? Because this therapist is working with them over here. The therapist might be seeing them twice as much as I am as a church leader. And so how do I know what's going on? And it's really simple. I could tell you the interview every time. Hey, KF, how's it going? Hope, connection, however I'm going to do that. So how's going to therapy with whoever you go to? Oh, it's good. What about it is good? What are you learning? What are you feeling? What are you experiencing in therapy? Tell me why this is working for you. And do you know what they're going to do? They're going to tell you. Oh my gosh, I was totally learning about this thing called the drama triangle, where it's when you're not really sharing your true feelings, but you're just reacting bad. Oh, teach that to me. By the way, as a bishop, you want some free education? You want some free psychoed? You'll get it from your members.
Yeah.
I had a bishop who I went through my process with. He's like, do you know how much I've learned about sexual addiction because I sat and interviewed you?
Yeah.
Because I told him, I'm like, this is what I learned in group therapy. I agreed with this. I didn't agree with this. This is what someone said. So just ask them. Just literally have them tell you about it. And you will be inspired, one, to know how to speak hope into them and what's going on with them. And then two, you'll also be inspired because the Lord will tell you, hey, that's working. Yeah. That's a good resource for this person. God is in it and in this. Or they're going to go, yeah, we just go to couples therapy and I don't know, we just talk and it's never connected, and they're going to be totally deflated. P.S. Quit paying for that couples therapist. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
They're not doing anything, but people will wait and wait and wait. I hear this all the time. Well, how long are you going to therapy? 6 months. What happened? Nothing. Oh my gosh, that's thousands of dollars and a bunch of your time. Why did you do that?
Yeah. Yeah. I know that. So just simply asking them, you'll be able to really gauge if the severity of what they're dealing with is meeting the level of therapy they need. If it's not, then or if you're not getting back that answer of,
right.
wow, this is really transformational, it's really helping, you can back up and say, right. Why don't we don't have to keep doing this. Let's try something else. I have a few other resources here.
Right. My life is in total crisis. How's therapy once a week? Not helping. I feel like the hour ends in 2 seconds and I'm in total crisis. Could you meet with that therapist for a 3-hour block every week? Because you'll probably only need that for a couple months. Because if you actually got it and could deal with the things, right? But people fear, if I send them to a workshop, great, we're going to send this person to some thousands of dollar workshop every other month. No, you're going to do it once. And then they can go to therapy once a week or not at all and move into, what they need to move into. So just ask them. And then because then it doesn't have to be about your judgment. You know the Spirit sitting in that chair. The Lord's going to tell you, how's couples therapy? Really bad? Right? You have the spouse in there. The husband's like, it's great. It's fine. Wife walks in. I think the therapist just lets him lie about his sexual addiction and I feel really unsafe. Okay, so maybe try a different couples therapist.
Or a different type of therapy.
I'm not a rocket scientist, right? Or not couples therapy. Or right. And so to me, you don't have to have all of the answers. Dear member, I love you. What do you need? I think I need help. Does this feel like help to you? Therapy once a week? Yes. Okay. And then I meet with them in 2 weeks. How did that go? Man, I was just crying in there and I felt so seen and heard and loved. Okay, let's keep doing that one. We've been going to couples therapy for 3 months. Feels like a waste of time. I want to know why you're on month 3, right? I'm out. And so as a leader, that's how I can know whether or not that's going well. And then from managing the relationship, so one key thing that leaders need to know is even if a leader is paying for therapy, it doesn't mean that they can hear about the treatment from the counselor. So if someone calls me and says, hey, I'm Kurt's bishop, I'd like to know what's happening in those sessions that I'm paying for. My response is going to be, I cannot confirm or deny that I know anyone named Kurt.
Right.
And then I'm going to call you and say, hey, your bishop called me. Do you want me to talk to him about your treatment? And if you say yes, then I'm going to send you a form that you give me consent to talk to him.
Yeah, there's an actual form you sign.
There's an actual form you sign. And you as the bishop don't have to sign that form. So I would not be paying for a member's therapy without having that form signed. I would not say, oh, go to that therapist. I'm going to pay a bunch of money and I have no idea what's happening and I can never communicate with the therapist. No, I understand there's a consent form. If I'm going to pay for it, I need the therapist to sign.
Yeah.
You need to put my name on that form when you're in the therapist office and sign it. And then, so the therapist is not going to want to sit there and talk to you forever. I don't. I could spend half my career just talking to parents and family members and bishops, right? If I did. So here's what I do. I ask those questions to the member. Hey, member, what's going on? Blah, 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 blah. This is how therapy's going. It's really good. It's really bad. Whatever it is, great. I can send an email to the therapist. I can have a 3-minute conversation with the therapist. Hey, dear therapist, they say it's going really well and they're learning a lot. Accurate? Yep, accurate. Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, therapist, this couple's been coming to you for 3 months. They feel like they're not getting anything. I'm wondering if they should terminate and go to someone new. Honestly, I bet you the therapist says, yeah, it's not going that well. I think they should try someone else. Like, I bet you the therapist won't even lie about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, won't even be like, no, I'm figuring it out. And there's a lot of times that stuff happens because this is a truth. When people are doing their mental health, sometimes they aren't honest with their bishop. So I've had conversations with bishops that, how's the marriage going? Husband reports, it's going so well. We're doing really good. Husband calls me. Did you know she moved out 2 months ago? Oh, nope. That's not what he told me. When did you meet with him? 2 days ago. Well, I meet with him and the wife and yeah, they're separated. She moved out 2 months ago. So you might want to call him back in and be like, hey, bud.
It's not, yeah, that's not
right. And so I don't have to, if I'm a bishop, I don't have to spend 6 hours a week on whatever weeknight talking to a bunch of therapists. I can once a month, once every 2 months, just touch base and go, this is what I'm hearing, accurate, inaccurate. And the therapist can go thumb up, thumb down, 2-minute conversation. Yeah. You can text the therapist. You can send them an email.
Yeah.
But just touch. So you don't have to like have an ongoing relationship with this therapist.
Right.
Do it through the member.
So what advice would you give to the leader who's, great advice as far as the questions asked to the individual getting the therapy to really gauge if it's working or not? What about when you do call the therapist? I remember being that bishop, I felt like I needed to call him or her because, I was paying for it and how's it going? But I didn't really know what questions to ask, and they'd list some things off and be like, okay.
But again, what I would say is you don't. Just go through the member.
So that not even necessary to call the therapist per se.
So if you are referring someone to a therapist, I would say it's great to have an initial conversation and say, hey, therapist, I'm sending Kurt to you because he's depressed. Can you help people with depression? Sure can. That's my bag. Awesome. How long do you think it's going to take? Have you met? So my real advice is I would talk to the therapist after the therapist has met the member once. So what I would say is, hey, are you a therapist who deals with depression? Great. Cool. I'm sending you someone. Can we talk after you meet with them once? Great. Again, 2-minute conversation. That could just be an email or a text. So, hey, so you met Kurt. Do you think you can work with him? Totally. I could help this guy. How long do you think this is going to take roughly? Like, what do you recommend? And they might say, because people always want a time frame, and that doesn't make sense. How long? 3 months. Well, is that 3 months of them seeing you 10 times a week? Or is that 3 months of them seeing you once a week? So make sure you've established, because you might say to this person, right? Well, how often should they see you? If they would come twice a week, I think we could be done in like 2 months.
Yeah.
Oh, well, let's just do that instead of once a week for a year, right? And so I can see what's going on and touch base with that. Again, I think one of the biggest fears church leaders have is I'm spending all of this money and it's a waste and it's not doing anything. You will hear that through the member. Well, hey, how's therapy? Oh, it's great. What are you learning? Nothing, but it's great. You'll know the tone and you'll be like, this seems like a waste of time because you've been going to therapy for 6 months and you don't seem any less depressed. So like, what happened? And they may say, well, did you know that my mom died 2 months ago? So it's not helping me out. And you go, oh, that makes sense. Right? Again, chronic, not acute. Great. That makes sense. So you have been working on your depression, just the depression's working against you, right? And life circumstances, and that makes sense. And so I can use the member as a much bigger litmus test than I can trying to call all these therapists all the time.
Yeah. So I sort of setting an expectation of what do you expect? Because I hear this from a lot of therapists. They sort of get hear from the bishop saying, hey, I'll pay for 3. That's it. And you sort of feel like, well, I need 6 or 7 or 10, or this person needs an intensive experience or this isn't going to work. And so sometimes they'll just throw like, I'm willing to pay for 3. So figure that out in 3 sessions. But the conversation of setting an expectation could really help.
Yeah. And so if I'm a bishop and I feel like I need to set expectations, right? So if I feel like I need to say, hey, I'm willing to give you therapy. So I was in a bishopric in an inner city ward. So I understand we're willing to pay for your rent, but you have to come to church, right? We were a third of our congregation was essentially quasi-homeless. So I understand, like, it's not about just being a blank checkbook and hoping we're Mother Teresa and we've done the world good. Like, that's not the idea. But the number doesn't make sense, right? So that's like, to me, saying, well, let's manage your golf game based on how many different tees you break. Well, no, it doesn't matter. You might drive the ball crazy well that day and break a tee on every box. Or you may not break a single tee and you had the best score you've ever had. So to say 3 sessions, 8 sessions, I'm willing to pay for once a week for 3 months, I'm fine with doing that and reassessing. I hope you're meeting with that member more than every 3 months. But the question is, what are you hoping happens in this therapy session? I'm sending you to therapy because you struggle with a pornography addiction. Therapist, what can you do to help this person? I can totally help them with their addiction. What does that mean? They'll be looking at less porn. They'll have more self-worth. Their testimony will grow. What does that mean? And then I'm going to ask the member, do you feel like that you're acting out less or that your testimony's growing? Yes. Tell me about that. And then they're going to tell you. And then you're going to know whether the therapy is a waste of time or really effective.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really helpful. Anything else in the realm of, well, let me go back with, as far as when you're maybe communicating with a therapist or that individual, you're saying, how's therapy going? And maybe it's not going well. Do most therapists they're naturally recommending maybe more intensive options if they're, because not once through my whole 5 years did a therapist come to me and say, hey, you should send them to this intensive experience.
Yeah. So the truth is that most therapists don't know that it exists and aren't familiar with it themselves. That's the truth.
They just live in a world where we'll just meet
once a week
and see how far we get. And if we need to do 8 more sessions, we'll do 8 more sessions.
Yeah. Most of the therapists, they meet with 30 people a week for an hour at a time, and they crank that out.
Right.
So most of them are on that end of the buffet. But there are people who do workshops, intensives, things like that, and it is totally an effective. So statistically, people have a lot of success with that.
Yeah.
And so the truth is, it's harder to facilitate. So that's why you have less people doing it.
It's harder to facilitate intensive programs. Is that
correct?
What you're saying?
Right. Because see, for me to rent an office space, that's easy to do. For me to house and feed people for 3 days or 5 days, logistically, that becomes more difficult. And also, it's a different skill set. It tends to be a more experienced skill set to be able to facilitate things like that. So
if I was a therapist who maybe isn't recommending to intensive, how would they respond to that? Like if I said, is there any need for more intensive therapy? How would they respond to you?
The usual, if I were to make an argument against intensive, I would say it's really expensive. So that's a nice luxury if you have the money to do it.
It's like a rich people therapy.
It's kind of a rich people therapy. And that's nice if you have the luxury to do that. But, otherwise, I think we can handle your issue in us meeting once a week for whatever. But I'd have a hard pressed time finding someone, not to be rude, but I'd argue is credible, who's like, oh, your spouse just died? Totally. Meet with me once a week for like 2 months. We'll have it all worked out. I'd be like, wow, you got some secret sauce. You should share that with the world because we could be doing this better.
Yeah.
And so again, I don't think everyone even needs to go to therapy, right? And so do I think an intensive is for everyone? No. But one of the largest problems people have with therapy is that it doesn't work. That's the number one problem church leaders and people experience with therapy. Well, I went to a therapist for a year and it didn't work. So one part of that equation is you were probably taking the wrong thing off the buffet line. So that's the other part. The other part of it, which I think leads into the question of how do I find good therapists if I'm a church leader, is the different modalities that are out there. So there's a whole bunch of different modalities that are out there. So, right, the most classic is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. That's what most of us know as talk therapy, where I sit down and you and I talk about what's going on. When it comes to couples therapy, there's predominantly 2 models. that most people use. One is called EFT, emotionally focused therapy. And then the other one is by Gottman's. It's the Gottman model. And so a vast majority, I won't put a percentage on it, but a vast majority of like couples therapists who are like, I'm an expert couple therapist, typically is in one of those two models. By the way, they're both super effective. Like research is behind them. They have a lot of good. And then when it comes to, the addiction, you can get someone who, is certified. There's some different certifications for that from, dialectic, DBT to, sex addiction. There's CSTATs out there that do the Patrick Carnes stuff. And then there's
you're just listing, these are just different approaches that could happen in a therapist's office.
You could get trained in, right? Yeah. So for me, I do a lot of, I'm certified in experiential therapy. I do a lot of psychodrama, getting trained in somatic experiencing. So I'm doing some of those things, right? There's also internal family systems. There's lifespan integration. And again, all of these models are based on how do we get to the door? How do we find it? And then open it. That's whatever the therapy model is. So some will say, how do we get you out of your conscious mind to your subconscious mind? Some will say there's these different parts of yourself. So how do we get to the part of yourself that isn't being seen and heard? Get to the experiences. So one of the most well-known is EMDR, which is a way to process a difficult or traumatic experience. So there's a newer model out of that called brain spotting that they had a long time ago and it wasn't very good. And then they've done some stuff to figure out how it really works. So that happens pretty fast. And with all of these models, so when I go to talk to a therapy, if a therapist doesn't know their own model, pick a different one.
What do you mean by that? Why wouldn't they know their own model?
Well, I'm telling you how to find a good therapist, KF. So if you go to someone who does EMDR, say, how does EMDR work? Why does this work? Tell me why you do what you do.
And they should be able to respond in 2 minutes as far as what that is.
They're going to give you the elevator pitch or their speech, right? So for example, people who do brain spotting will tell you this. EMDR is effective. So this is according to someone who's pro brain spotting, right? So EMDR is the most researched form because they used it in the military for PTSD. So it has the most research behind it, effectively dealing with PTSD and trauma. It's the most research-based one. So EMDR, the model, if you go get trained in it, will tell you it takes 8 to 13 sessions to set up and then execute. So if you come in and say, I had a traumatic experience, after I get to know you and we enter the model, it will take 8 to 13 sessions to set up and execute that traumatic experience. Brain spotting takes 2 to 3 sessions. So maybe the brain spotting people are hippie crazy and you can't do it that fast. EMDR is super effective for a lot of people. I'd never tell anyone to not go get EMDR. I also know people went to EMDR and they're like, that's a joke. So again, there is no right answer. We're not here to tell you. And I'm like, and the secret model is da-da-da-da. Of course I have a preference. I believe the body keeps the score. I think it's all about trauma, da-da-da-da-da. That's the camp I'm in.
So you have a preferred model or 2 or 3, but all of these things you've listed off are very credible and nobody would be crazy going to a therapist who is using it. Right?
Right. And so the real catch, so we'll do it from the leader perspective and then talk about just being a person. So from a leader, what I want to say, if I'm going to call therapists and say I need to get some therapists in my bag, in my referral bag, this is what I'm going to say. So I'm going to call a therapist. So I'm going to call you and say, hey, KF, you're a therapist. By the way, the letters behind their name, LCSW or clinical mental health counselor or LCP, depending where you are in the country, or marriage and family, they literally don't matter. I'm not trying to be, I'm just going to tell you the truth.
Even if letters in front of their name, like doctor or...
No, yeah. So that would be, so we'll jump on that.
Okay, sorry, we're pushing it too far.
No. So a real easy, okay, that's about prescribing medicine.
Right.
So we're going to hijack here for a minute. But you're the one who tangented, not me.
Right, that's my job.
So if you're saying, is this person going to give me a medical pill? Are they going to give me a pill to take every day for my depression? Or are they going to talk to me about my childhood for my depression? If you go to a therapist or counselor, they are going to talk to you about your childhood to heal your depression. If you go to someone who has a doctor in front of their name, they are going to probably prescribe you something. That's not 100% true all the time. That's a general rule that when someone says, oh, I was depressed and I went and saw Dr. Swenson. Dr. Swenson probably is a psychiatrist or a psychologist and is going to put you on medication and may also do therapy. If you go to so-and-so counselor who's an LCSW, clinical mental health, whatever, right, CMHC or whatever, they are probably going to say, let's talk about your childhood and do whatever therapy model I work in. And by the way, I might refer you to someone who can prescribe medicine for you. So that's the quick difference on that. So as far as the model goes, they should know their own model. So I'm going to call you and say, hey, KF, you're a counselor. Yes. I have members in my congregation who are working on their marriage and have marital issues. You say you do marriage counseling. What do you do? And you're going to tell me in 2 or 3 minutes.
I'll say, I do the Gottman, whatever.
You're going to say, right? Yeah, I'm trained in Gottman, and I'm trained in this, and I'm trained in motivational interviewing. And then I can ask you a question. Well, why does Gottman's work? And they're passionate about what they do. And they're going to say, well, Gottman's is the best because da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Right? So if you call me, I'm going to tell you why I think experiential and psychodramatic and somatic therapy is the best. Because it's the model I work in and I drink my own Kool-Aid. Mm-hmm. Just as if you go to someone who does EMDR, they're going to tell you why EMDR is the best. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. You don't, unless you want to write a book about the king of the hill and therapy models, just does it feel good to you or not?
Right.
If you call that person and they say, this is how I think marriage looks, this is what I feel, this is what I do, and you go, that makes sense to me, then you start referring members to them. You're talking to the members about their therapy. So if I send 3 members to Stephen Shields and all of them have a bad experience with me, quit sending people to Stephen Shields.
Right.
If you send 3 members to me and they're like, oh my gosh, Stephen Shields is the greatest, we're upset, and you were seeing change in them, now put Stephen Shields in your bag.
Right. And this is an interesting dynamic because I would say close to 0% of bishops or leaders that are referring actually take the time to maybe vet certain counselors. Because typically what happens is you outsource to family services, bless their heart. I mean, they're a team of great therapists and the church run and things like that. But then it's like, I noticed sending there, you get back a lot of mixed results. Like, I didn't really jive with that guy.
And in fairness, they're not live all end all. So I think I am an effective and really good therapist. I'm not for everybody.
Yeah.
So I had an individual therapist that I love. And she was totally like a bit of a ball buster, you know, and personality wise, like that worked for me, particularly early in my addiction recovery. We went to her also for couples therapy. Kayla hated her because Kayla's like a lot softer. She's really wounded at the time and hurt. And so when this lady's like, well, what do you mean, Kayla? Kayla's like, what do you mean? I don't even have to be here. He's the one who cheated on me. What? Yeah. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so there's no live all. So to me, it's over time, right?
Right.
So if I send 3 people to this couples counselor and all 3 of them have a bad experience, that tells me it's probably the counselor. Mm-hmm. If I send 5 people to them and 4 have a good experience and the one couple doesn't, it's either a personality fit or that couple doesn't care.
Yeah.
Or they're not engaged or one of them didn't really show up or what. It's going to be on the member, right?
So let me share this recommendation. And I hate to say this because I'd want to be a good advocate for all the church's services and resources. But from my experience, what I found is when I sent people to family services, I sort of didn't know what I was going to get, what therapist. But when I began to get referrals and recommendations of different therapists, and I found a handful that I felt I really jived with, the people I sent really jived with, and then I could continue. I sort of had these referral sources.
Right.
And so year 3, when someone came in with marital issues, I'm like, I got 3 therapists. Try this one first. Let me know how it goes. And if it came back not, then I'd say, okay, try this one. Right. And you sort of need to build that house of resources.
And I would not, as a bishop, if I were a new bishop, I wouldn't take 20 hours to find a bunch of therapists.
Right.
You know what I do when a member walks in my office? Hey, I'm really struggling with depression. Why don't you find 3 therapists that you think would be good and let me know?
Yeah. And then
Great.
you
found 3? Which one do you think is good? And now I'm going to send a couple other members there. And the members, because I'm already spending my time meeting with the members.
Yeah.
I'm already spending my time meeting with them. I'm wondering what to talk about in this interview. Here you go. This is what you talk about. And now I'm going to know. After being a bishop for a year, you're going to have a Rolodex of, oh, what's your issue? Oh, it's a childhood thing. It's a this thing. It's a trauma. It's an addiction. I've got 3 people because of where I've sent people or referred people. And then when you have therapists that you've seen a lot of good work from, you can also ask them for referrals. So I've had people ask me. So like, I don't work with kids like under high school. So I don't need them. Like, I don't want them in my practice. It's not what I do, but I can tell you where some good ones are.
Yeah.
And so I've had bishops call me and say, hey, I've got a 12-year-old kid or 3 kids and a single mom that's struggling. I'm like, oh, that's not my bag. But I know this man or woman, so-and-so therapist who's actually really good with that. Yeah. And if you trust me, you'll likely trust, who they send. And so that's how I would find the therapist if I were a church leader. And then again, because it's not just LDS services. So LDS services connected to the church and all of that, but also it's an agency. So if you call an agency, right? So who has multiple therapists working for them, and you call 1-800-agency and say, hey, I've got a client, who do you think that client's going to get referred to?
As somebody in the agency.
Right. And do you think it's going to get referred to the owner of the agency?
No.
Or the intern?
The intern or...
Almost always.
Yeah.
Almost always. Because it's likely that if that therapist owns an agency, they probably have a pretty successful practice,
right.
Which means they probably aren't hurting to try and find clients to work with, which means if you just pick an agency. So I know one bishop who has 2 or 3 people he's found in LDS Family Services who he gets this feedback about being really good. So he doesn't refer people to LDS Family Services. He refers them to Susan and to so-and-so and to so-and-so. And so I don't care what the agency is. Don't refer to an agency.
Gotcha.
Refer them to a person.
Right.
Because you can go to an agency and have an amazing experience and a really bad experience. Because are you getting the person who runs it or that whole thing?
Yeah.
Or are you getting... So I wouldn't hang that reputation on a single person. I have no doubt there's a therapist in LDS Family Services who's super ineffective and doesn't do a good job. And I personally know some in there who ball hard and are excellent therapists. And the reason they work for LDS Family Services is because they love the church.
Yeah.
So they spend time working in LDS Family Services, even though they can make more money in their own private practice. So it's, go for the individuals. Don't go for an agency.
And this is probably a good segue to the concept I've discovered just from interviewing a lot of therapists about a lot of topics. You take someone like Tony Overbay in California. He's literally taking appointments at 6 a.m. And I keep telling him, like, Tony, come on, man, you gotta sleep, And he does. And he's talking to him. He's fine. And he's balanced his time, and I'm sure he is. But like the good therapists out there who I would love to just refer people to them, they're 3, 4, 5 months out. I don't know. And so you sort of get frustrated with, now I'm looking for new therapists every week. I mean, there's a therapy crisis right now. And I don't know if I'd call it a shortage of therapists, but the reality is there's a whole lot of people who need really good therapists. And that list of really good therapists isn't long enough.
Yeah. And just like the conversation, when someone comes to me and says, my bishop was totally shaming or didn't see me, I'm like, that probably was true. It probably happened, right? Or I didn't feel safe with them. When people come to me and go, I had a bad experience in therapy, you probably did. Like, so therapy, like any other industry, is a business where people work, and there are people who work in the business who aren't very good. There's every year people who get reported to state agencies and get their license pulled for malpractice. There's a part of the population that shouldn't be practicing, right? And there are people who are amazing and do incredible work and are awesome. There's everything in between, right? And so it's really about finding what works for you. And to the point of, there being a crisis, that's real. I mean, that's totally real. I remember when I started as a therapist, I'm like, how long does it take me to? And they're like, if you're good, it will take 5 seconds. And I'm like, no, but really, like, how are people going to find me? No, the truth is, if you're good, it takes 5 seconds. There's a crisis. There's a shortage. There's more people who need good therapy than there are good therapists. However, there is a way in.
This is worth all the price of admission right here.
Worth all the price of admission right here. So this shouldn't be hard to figure out, but therapists like to work with people who want to do the work.
Say that one more time, Steve.
Therapists want to work with people who want to do the work. So I have a client right now, young kid, like a year off his mission, right? Kind of came home from his mission early, had some stuff, couldn't afford to come anymore. And I'm like, what can you pay? So I'm $120 an hour. I don't take insurance currently. And he comes back to me. He's like, I can pay like $47 an hour, like a session, because I see him for 2 hours at a time. I'm like, where do you get the number 47? This kid had like ran his budget, like put it together. Like, is that someone, do you think that guy wants to do the work?
Yeah.
Come on, totally. I'm like, well, how about we just round it 40? Because that's a hard number for me. So let's have some grace. And totally, let's do it. I love meeting with that person at a discount because I'm like, hey, are you doing the work? He's hungry and he's doing the work and he wants to. I got into a couples therapist, Kayla and I, who runs her agency. And we'd been to like 2 or 3 different couples therapists. It had not gone well. So we terminated instead of sitting there for 3 years going, whatever. And she's like, well, I'm not really taking new clients. And I'm like, that doesn't work for me. I know who you are. You are one of the most trained EFT therapists in the state of Utah, and I need help, and other people aren't helping me. I'm telling you, here's my story. I want to do the work. So I will meet with you while you're driving in your car on the phone. I will show up at whatever time you tell me to show up. I'm willing to do the work. We want to meet with you pretty please. And she's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, let me know and follow up with me. And I said, great. When do you want me to follow up with you? She's like, well, you can call me on Friday. Call her on Friday. She doesn't answer. Send her a text. And I'm like, pretty please. I really want to work with you. Let me know. She responds with a text and she's like, I can do Mondays at 4. Done.
And you're in.
We saw her for a year and a half.
Nice.
Working when we were working recovery. So the good therapists want to work with good people, because here's what I know about all the good therapists, myself included. Have a waiting list. Here's the deal. But if you really show up and want to show up, the funniest thing is I'm probably going to call you when I have a cancellation.
Yeah.
And so even as a bishop, right, you can say to that really good therapist, hey, here's what's going on. I have this wonderful couple in my ward, and they are just really trying to make it happen, and they're in big crisis, but I'm telling you, they have hearts of gold. Would you please just meet with them and see? Would you make it happen? And frankly, I'd have the member make the call as well. I wouldn't just call as the bishop. I would put it on them. And if you reach out that way, I'm telling you, you're going to get in, because there's so many people who their spouse wants them to go, or they just go, or they're spinning wheels. Think about it. Do you want to sell burritos to someone who doesn't even like Mexican food? Hey, how did you like this meal I prepared for you? It's okay. It's lunch. Sure, you can sell a lot of burritos that way, but that's not who you want to meet with. And so if you show up wanting to, the other thing I will tell you is good therapists are worth the wait. I know emotionally everything feels like it's in a crisis right now. So if you could go to whatever therapist who's available tomorrow, and they're like, I've got 4 different hours tomorrow. So that probably tells you something about how good they are. The market has told us. Or they're just starting out, ramping up. And you go to someone else who's like, well, I have a 3-month waiting list. My advice, wait the 3 months. Or what you can do is go to the other therapist and be on the waiting list. And I'd go to the other therapist and say, hey, I'm on a waiting list for a different therapist. I'd be honest and own it. I'm on a waiting list for a different therapist, but I'd still like to do some work when I'm here with you. And if this goes really well, I just won't ever go to the other therapist.
Yeah.
So challenge accepted. Let's go.
Nice. So willing to work, and I appreciate that perspective. So what if, because sometimes we sort of, as a bishop, we prescribe therapy. Like, listen, your life is out of control. You got to go to, you need some help, and you got to go to therapy. Right. But they're not willing to work for it. They're sort of like, this is my probation, requirement. I got to, hey, Steve, oh no, you're out 3 months. Okay, see you, bye. Like, they're just, what do you do with people who don't want to put it in the work?
So I feel like this is so fun. You're just getting all of the random things I want people to know about therapy. So it's Christ's invitation to come. I don't make anyone do anything. That was the other dude's plan. That was the rebellion. Hey, do you want to work on your marriage? No. Okay. Hey, do you want to come back to church? No. Okay. Christ was never like, well, if you don't, you're going to hell. You know that, right? Just want to confirm that with you before I get off the doorstep. No. He extends the invitation. So one of the most beautiful stories I saw of this, and I won't say the general authority's name in case I butched it. And then he's not like, there's some guy out there telling my story and he butched it. So he has his kids and he's like, I want my kids to really understand correct principles. And so his daughter comes to him and she's like 10, like young. He's like, hey, it's Sunday. Can I watch a movie? And he's like, we generally don't watch movies on Sunday at our house. That's kind of a Sabbath day holy for us. No. And he's like, well, why don't you pray about it and get an answer? They go through this 3 times. And she says, no, I think I'm going to watch it. He doesn't take away her agency or accountability. He leaves it with her. So she goes and she turns on the movie, which also he's like, I'm kind of questioning how appropriate that movie is for you at your age as well. And he's like, she's going to turn it off. She's going to watch for 10 minutes. She's going to feel guilty, turns it off, watches the entire movie and goes to bed. And he's like, parenting fail, right? They're sitting at breakfast the next morning and she's kind of off. And he says, what's going on with you? She says, yeah, I don't think I'm going to watch movies on Sunday anymore. So this is, to me, a drive me crazy about the widow's mite and sacred funds. Someone's going to spin a story to you and you're going to send them to therapy for 3 years for thousands of dollars and they're going to do nothing. And it's going to be a waste of time because they presented the right way in your office. Where real easy, so this is how I do it, and I recommend this to every church leader I talk to, and parent, frankly, I would, unless they're a minor and don't have the ability. But I will not see anyone who doesn't pay for part of their therapy. So I have a client right now, the bishop of the 120 pays 115. The client pays $5. Don't tell me you don't have $5 a week. You can't find $5. So I had another client. Bishop's like, no, I'm going to pay for the whole thing. And they just send them and they show up, and I didn't have better boundaries at the time. And so I called the bishop back and I'm like, let me be clear with you. If you do not text me back, or the member does not text me back with a number that they are paying, I will not see them anymore. And the bishop's like, okay, fine, we'll do it. So he's avoiding a difficult conversation which needs to be had. So I'm giving him his agency and accountability back, right? So he now is going to give the member their agency and ability back. So you know what they decide? $10 a session. Guess how many more times this client came to see me?
Zero.
Yeah. This wasn't worth $10. This isn't worth $10 to the member. But we should use the sacred funds at $110 worth when they don't value it at 10. So to me, that's that moment. The single mom who's struggling to make it happen and can sit with you in tears and say, this is what's happening to me in my therapy. This is what I'm capable of. This is what I'm learning. I learned about my trauma. I learned about this. I learned about that I don't have boundaries. I know what went wrong in my marriage. I understand why I struggle at church. Here's my shame. I don't care if she's paying $5 a session, and I don't care if she goes for 3 years while she's figuring out all this chronic stuff that's happened to her. That should be an easy one for you as a church leader to see. So I have this thing, because I feel like there's so much therapy that gets paid for that shouldn't, and then by the church, and then I feel like there's therapy that we should be paying for that we don't.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the easy skin in the game. It works. I'm telling you, it works.
So going back to the principle is like, just leave it in that inviting state of like, you can invite them, but if they don't want to go, like, you can't force them and magically come back like, oh, Bishop, I'm so glad you forced me there. Like, all these magical things happened. I mean, maybe some outlier somewhere that will happen, but more often than not, if they're not willing to work for it, like, all you can do is just invite and say, okay, well, I'm here.
And let's understand it's like the kid who's like, I don't want to go on Trek. And you're like, just go. And the resistance really is low, and they go and they have a great experience.
Right.
So if I've got a guy in my office who's struggling with porn, he's like, therapy doesn't work. It doesn't matter. I've been before. And go like, look, I think I really have a good one. And he's worked for other people in the ward. Just go 3 times. And then if you don't want to go, we'll never talk about going to therapy again, my good brother.
Yeah.
But why don't we try that on, right? But I'm not going to try and get people to engage in a way, particularly if I'm using the church's money to pay for it, when they're not engaged. And again, if someone tells me, oh, therapy's okay, it's okay, I send my email to the therapist. Are they really engaged? Oh, no, they didn't tell you. They've missed half the appointments. Done paying for that.
Yeah.
Thanks, therapist, for letting me know, right? I mean, hopefully the good therapist would call you and tell you, but, right?
Yeah.
Wait, another really good thing to understand is ask your therapist if they go to therapy or if they've been to therapy. That sounds like a stupid question, but I'm telling you, it's gold. Because they should tell you, oh, I've currently been to therapy, or these are the type of therapy models that have worked for me. So don't go to a therapist that's like, oh, I would never go to marriage counseling. I've been divorced 3 times, but I'd never go to marriage counseling. But yeah, let me counsel you on your marriage. They don't have to have it perfect to be able to help you. But that is also one it's a qualification for me looking for a therapist personally, is I want someone who's engaged actively in drinking their own Kool-Aid, doing their own work. Or the other question you can ask them is, what are you currently getting trained in? Because you don't want a therapist that's like, oh, 30 years ago, I learned some really effective stuff. And now because I have a full practice, I just quit learning forever. So those are 2 questions that can be really helpful.
Yeah. And I think that's indirect advice to maybe church leaders who maybe as a bishop or relief society president, you should maybe be getting consistent therapy, especially during this time where you're in an intensive calling with much responsibility, right?
Oh, I would challenge any church leader who's holding that much for other people. I would challenge you to find a therapist that you think is legit or qualified and go to 3 sessions. I dare you.
Oof. All right. Email us. Let us know who does that. That's awesome.
I will. And when you do, send us an email.
Yeah,
Let us know how it went. Well, because the truth is, to church leader, every time I talk to a bishop, the first thing I say is or a Relief Society president, the first thing I say is, bless you for the weight that you carry and the hard part of this job, because I know what it is. And a lot of ward members don't see that when they just see you, setting up and glad handing at the Christmas party.
Yeah.
And I've not once had a bishop not feel seen and been like, whoa, thank you. Like, because it's true. You've been handed this weight that you serve in this leadership. You deserve a place to process your stuff.
Yeah. This would be a great future episode. If we could email us, like, it'd be great to hear people's experiences. I was just a bishop. I felt like I had things together. I went to 3 sessions and this is what happened.
So I just did a 3-day intensive with a stake president, and it was fantastic and a beautiful experience. And one of his things was, I don't take care of myself. My job's to take care of everyone else. And he got a lot taking care of himself, and he deserves it.
Yeah.
He's helped so many people and still helps so many people.
So I want to pivot back to this as far as like intensive therapy, because this is such a foreign concept to so many leaders. Because there is, maybe the individual does need 12 sessions of that talk therapy or some type of thing, or maybe there's some intensive experience that they go for a week and they come back, and that can still, they can make progress that way. So it's something to at least investigate, understand, and as far as the resources out there. So how can a leader begin to understand the resources for intensive therapies? And I'll just share, when I was a bishop, there was this one lady that came to me and said, "Oh, Bishop, I found this exactly what I need. I'm dealing with A, B, and C, and they have this program and it's $50,000. So if you could help me with that, that would be great." And in my mind, I'm thinking, like, I shut off after $50,000. I'm like, there is no way as a bishop I'm going to write that check, nor I don't think I even can. I'm going to make phone calls and things like that, right? And so where can leaders go to start understanding intensive therapy? Because it would be great if you find the right match and a person goes to it and comes back, you save money, and they're at a better spot sooner.
Yep. So 2 reasons to pull that card off of the buffet. So, and again, I want to hold space as we're talking perspectives. I literally run intensives. The reason I run intensives is because I personally have seen how much more effective it is than meeting 1 hour a week. And it's not the right situation for everyone. So if you're going to pull that off the buffet table, to me, there's primarily 2 reasons. I'm stuck. I've been working on a mental health issue forever, and I'm not getting anywhere. And I feel like I've kind of tried everything else. Or right now, it's fresh, it's a big trauma, such as a death, a divorce, the beginning of an addiction recovery, anything like that. Or I just found out that I was molested by my father when I was a kid, or I just stepped into owning that my alcoholism has a ton to do with a bunch of physical abuse. And so I just stepped into Bishop's office and I'm honest about the alcohol and the abuse, and it's all feeling really big all at once. And so that would be a time that I could step into that type of setting. There is a lot of ways to do that that's less expensive. So the Warrior Heart, what Elders Quorum should be, it really isn't therapy, but it's a weekend and it's only $500. P.S. I'm on the team with it. It's totally a labor of love. Everyone there could be doing something else and make more money. Promise.
And nobody makes any money.
And nobody makes any money, right? They're there because they love it. So there are things like that, right? There are weekends, smaller things like that. And then there's full, week stuff. So I also, work at OnSite in Tennessee and at the Oaks in California. And that's, to do a week program there is $6,400. And so, but it's not all $50,000 stuff, right?
Yeah. And when you say $6,400, like from my bishop perspective, I'm thinking, oof, like that's a heavy check, but
right. And that's where I would look at it aggregately. If I have someone who, just went through a membership council because of huge sexual addiction issues. If I have someone whose spouse just died or had a child commit suicide, I promise you will spend $6,000 of therapy over the next several years for that person.
Might as well get it over with and see more progress.
If someone were to see me, I'm $120 an hour, which is very middle of the road for therapy and private costs. So if you see me 4 times a month, it's $480, it's $500. So there you go.
Yeah.
In 8 months, you could have gone to OnSite instead of seeing me once a week. So, and there are people that I meet and see that I'm like, yeah, you should just go to a program at OnSite. Like, this is great. And I think I'm good, but I think that for you would be a better choice off of the buffet. So that's when I would look at, crisis in that moment, or if I'm super stuck, right? So if someone's been working on pornography addiction for 10 years, you can just hope the next therapist is the right one, and they might be, but the breakthrough that they could have in a weekend, intensive patient experience, and that could be anywhere from, Warrior Heart for $500 to $1,500, right? I mean, I had a couple from out of state contact me and they're like, we really want to do some couples work. I saw them for a single day. It was under $1,000. They don't have access to that type of resource where they live. So they drove the 4 hours here to, Salt Lake, where I am. And we did a day intensive. And I'll be honest, they were very happy with their experience and like, this is really great. Maybe we do this in a year after we've kind of integrated everything from what we've done here or moved to that. So there's ways to do it. And a lot of therapists, you can ask, hey, I just went through divorce. Could I block out 4 hours of therapy with you instead of? And the truth about it is there is truth to that. It's the rich people therapy because frankly, it is. Mm-hmm. Because I get that it's a lot easier from a financial perspective to write a check for $120 every other week than to come up with $5,000 right now. That's true. So totally understand that that's real. And you also have to ask yourself, why is it that people who have resources do it that way? Because they just like to waste money to show everyone they have resources? No, because it's more effective.
Yeah.
That's why they do that.
Right.
So
it'd be worth an individual either engaging with their bishop if they can't cover the costs of some of these intensives to do that. And hopefully through this conversation, it's opening sort of that perspective that these things should be considered, right?
Right.
So would any therapist or most therapists like go to would they know of these intensives, or I'm sure people can reach out to you directly and you do some of your own and
totally. Yep. Yeah. I mean, there's different options depending on who you're talking to. So a lot of them will do different type of retreats. So you had Thomas on.
Oh, Thomas McConkie.
Yes. Thomas McConkie on. I should refer to him as Thomas. Everyone knows who he is. So he's a big deal in the meditation,
mindfulness
space. Uh-huh. So he does retreats. He does intensive stuff. And it's not crazy. It's not $50,000 to go to one of his deals.
Right.
Now, what you do need to know is the second he puts it up, it will sell out. So follow him and go to it in a year.
Yeah.
You're still going to be depressed. You're still going to have your problems. So it'll be there. Go there in a year.
And I'm glad you mentioned that one because Thomas isn't a therapist, but he has intensive experiences that can still help people progress. Right.
Super.
Yeah.
Totally. I know people who have gone to his stuff and are like, man, that was so helpful. And so that's really big, right? And so I'm doing one this October for men with addiction and trauma, down in Southern Utah where I do my intensives. It's $4,500. So no, it's not cheap. But in that 5 days, I will get you way further than if you meet with me 1 hour a week. And so if someone's stuck, so if you can go to your bishop on something like that or say, hey, if I pay $1,000 of this, would you pay the $3,500? And then, I won't go to any therapy for 6 months after this. I'm going to take what I learned from that experience and I'm going to go to a 12-step meeting to be consistent. And I'm going to integrate the information and integrate what I learned.
Yeah.
Right. And so I wouldn't just be like, hey, wing it. The lady that's like, I found what I need. Just write me a check for $50,000 and let's see what happens. Right. But with planning, you can step into it. So I have a client who's going to OnSite for a program and I'm meeting with them only 3 times before they go, to orient them, to get them straight so that they can get the most out of that experience. And then I may or may not meet with them after, probably not. And so, so we can work around it. The other big thing that people don't look a lot into is group. Group tends to be cheaper than individual therapy and is actually quite effective.
Yeah.
So there's, the sexual addiction space, you've got Addo, LifeStar, different people who do things like that. I'm starting to run some groups again because it's effective from that perspective. So also look into group. And again, Google's a really great thing. So you could type into Google, intensive workshops for depression and stuff will pop up.
Yeah. And you can call them and ask some of the questions you said, like, tell me about this. How does this work? Yeah.
Right. And they can sell themselves to you.
Yeah.
Call OnSite and say, why would I spend $6,500 and be out there for a week? You're telling me it's a year worth of therapy? And they do. And they have a reason why they think that. And they'll tell you all about it.
Right.
And then you can decide in your gut, does that work for me or not?
Yeah. Really helpful. What have we missed?
So value system. That's what I want to hit on because this is really big with LDS people. And I think we're missing the mark.
Okay. Unpack it there. What do you mean by value system?
So I don't want to go to a therapist who isn't LDS because they won't get me.
Mm-hmm. Or they'll lead me away from the church.
Right. They'll lead me away from the church. So all therapists should align to your value system. If you're going to a therapist and they're telling you what your value system should be, pick a different one. Mm-hmm. They should never say, what's your value system? So
it's really unethical in the therapeutic world, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so I shouldn't say, if I ask you, so typically an answer is going to be like this. Well, I don't know. I think that I might be gay. Or, my wife says I shouldn't be looking at porn and I feel like it's not a problem. the therapist is going to say something like, well, what's true to you and your values? If you're actually speaking from your authentic voice, where do you stand? If this stuff wasn't in the way or this pressure from this relationship, what would your truth be? So they're going to go there. So it's okay to be worried about it, and you can check for conflict. So I can go to a therapist and say, and do, I currently go to a therapist for myself who is not LDS. And my first thing is I said, hey, one of my things is that I am an active Latter-day Saint. If you have a problem with Latter-day Saints or that community and you don't want to work with me, that's okay. I'll find another therapist. It's no big deal. So if this doesn't work for you, if you're going to be bothered by me and it's disruptive and you can't hold space for my value system, what I believe, because I do believe it, then we can't work together. And then see what that therapist tells you. And so if they're like, oh no, I mean, I hate the LDS church, but we're fine. You can be like, maybe not for me, right?
Yeah.
But if they can go, oh, I don't care what you are. Sure. I believe in God. Let's do however you do God. That's great. Then you can go, okay, that's fine. And then I just tell them what my value system are. So people are afraid to say the things. It's therapy. You were paying them to be there. Mm-hmm. So I can say to my therapist, look, I don't care what you think. So right, I had one that I said, I absolutely believe that sexual addiction's real. So if you think like looking at porn and stuff is fine, I don't care what you think. You just need to know this is what I think. I don't. So if you can roll with that, and they're like, yeah, I can roll with that. Great. Let's roll with it. I work with people all the time who my personal value system does not align with theirs. But it doesn't matter because I'm just helping them get true to themselves, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not giving them advice. I'm not telling them how to live their life. Mm-hmm. I'm helping them open the doors and get where they need to go to. And that's the thing. Whenever I'm looking at a therapist from a client, so as a member, right, whoever, you should be able to sit with the therapist, just like we said with the church leader, and say, I'm here to do marriage counseling. My goals are A, B, C. My concerns are D, E, F. Can you answer those? And if they can't give you an answer that makes you feel good, go to someone else. Mm-hmm. So I just started with a new therapist. And I'm like, I'm specifically came to you because you practice this modality and I think I need it. This is the work I want to do with you here. This is what I'm hoping to accomplish. Can you do that? Yes or no? And she told me, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, yeah, this is my person. I had the warm and fuzzies. I was crying in the office and I'm like, this feels good. This is right. And so then termination comes when I'm just paying for a friend. Unless you want to do that, then I guess you're welcome to. But if my goal was for us to communicate well in our relationship, so one of the best models I saw of this was that EFT therapist Kayla and I fought to get into. Mm-hmm. We walk in there one day and she's like, do you know how to talk to each other? Like, do you know how to get your feelings seen and heard? Yeah. Do you know how to do this? Do you know how to do this? Yeah. Okay, so I think we're done meeting. And it's just a choice now. You guys can choose to have a better marriage or not, but you have the tools, you know what to do. If you get really stuck, you're totally welcome to come back and see me and we can work on something in the office. Otherwise, have a great life. Bye. Mm-hmm. And I do that with people all the time. So once I have the tools, I don't have to sit in the therapist's office and work it out. It's like riding a bike. If I literally don't know how to ride a bike, stay in the therapist's office. But once I'm like, I know how to ride, I'm just not that smooth when I shift the gears, well, just go out and ride your bike and figure it out. It's called revelation. We believe in it. God's with you. He wants to heal you. That's the point. But too often, I think people, because they have a great relationship with their therapist, and I think too many therapists love their clients, and so they just stay meeting. And it's like, no, termination should happen when I've learned the skills. If I'm just practicing them and I'm not stuck, get out of the office.
Perfect. Steve, if people do want to track you down and connect with you, see if you have any open appointments or convince you that they're really willing to work for it, where would you send them? And I want to be sure to plug your podcast, which I never miss an episode of.
Oh, it's true. And I appreciate that. So you can just find me at StephenWShields.com. Stephen with a V, Shields, like the word we use in the English language. So middle name's Weston, if you're just curious. So StephenWShields.com is where you can find me, and you can see, upcoming workshop in October, starting some different groups and doing that. And that's
and Unashamed Unafraid.
And
podcast.
Unashamed Unafraid, everywhere podcasts are found. Totally come and apply for a scholarship. Like, I literally will pay for you to go to therapy. Like, go to my website and I will pay for 6 sessions. Like, it's that easy. Or if you want to go to OnSite, you want to try the intensive thing, we have a scholarship for one. So come and check it out. unashamedunafraid.com for the scholarship stuff, donate stuff, or anywhere podcasts are found.
All right, Steve. So I usually have typical questions I ask, but I know I want to start, or I want to end as we started with a focus on the great healer, Jesus. Like, where can we end with focus on Jesus Christ in this discussion of therapy?
Well, what I would say is this. This is, for me, I actually don't care where you find it, but find it. And what I've learned in my walk and my healing and relationship with God is He is going to speak your language and meet you on your terms in your ground. So I've shared with you, as you know, I use it when I speak sometimes. When I started Unashamed, everyone told me it was a bad idea. You shouldn't do it, which was them speaking out of their shame. And I did it anyways. And as I was starting to do it, I was worried about it. I met Lecrae, who's a Christian hip hop artist. I love hip hop. So Christian hip hop worked for me. It's my language. And when I met with him, I was able to meet him before a show. And I said, hey, you've been really honest about parts of your story in your book, blah, blah. He's like, my scars are my scars. And I only answer to God. And in that moment, I had personal revelation where God said, Steve, you know I told you to do this. I'm the only one you're accountable to. Do what I asked you to do. And you will be blessed. You will be whole. It's a part of you. So I went and did it. And so it is never the therapist's job it's not like going to the doctor. It's about your relationship with God. If that therapist is helping you in your relationship with God, keep them. If they're not. If you aren't going to therapy because you're afraid of it, or you're worried about the cost, or it's something like that, I would encourage you to just give it a try. Maybe you don't want to spend thousands of dollars on therapy, but you know what? Find a really good therapist, get on their 3-month waiting list. You'll forget about it. Show up there 3 months later, spend $150 or $80 or whatever they cost one time, and just see. Just come and see, because what if it really works? And the truth is, there's a lot of bad therapy out there and bad therapy that's happened. And it's changed people's lives. It's been a tool in the way that God finds people for a lot of people. So don't go all or nothing on it. Just know what it is and what it can be for you, because, right, where two or more are gathered, KF. And so when I can gather with someone else or in a group or in a setting where it's confidential, I can be completely honest about who I am, and this person is trained to help me find my true self. I think you've got a good chance of God showing up there if you're showing up.
That concludes this episode of the Leading Saints podcast. We'd love to hear from you about your questions or thoughts or comments. You can either leave a comment on the post related to this episode at leadingsaints.org, or go to leadingsaints.org/contact and send us your perspective or questions. If there's other episodes or topics you'd like to hear on the Leading Saints podcast, go to leadingsaints.org/contact and share with us the information there. And we would love for you to share this with any individual you think this would apply to, especially maybe individuals in your ward council or other leaders that you may know who would really appreciate the perspectives that we discussed. And remember, text the word LEAD to 474747 in order to access the 3 free sessions of the LGBT Saints Library.
It came as a result of the position of leadership which was imposed upon us by the God of heaven, who brought forth a restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when the declaration was made concerning the only true and living church upon the face of the earth, we were immediately put in a position of loneliness, the loneliness of leadership, from which we cannot shrink nor run away, and to which we must face up with boldness and courage and ability.